This building may not be very familiar to you, but I'm sure that the magazines we make inside are. This is the home of Future Publishing, Europe's biggest publisher of computers magazines. My name's Steve Jarrett, and I'm the editor of one of those magazines, perhaps the best known of all, Amiga Format. Before we get down to business, perhaps you'd like to take a look inside. These are the offices of the biggest, best, and most famous Amiga magazine, Amiga Format. And here are a few of the people that work long and hard to bring you the most read Amiga magazine on the newsstands. Behind me is Sue White, Amiga Format's art editor. She's responsible for making sure the magazine looks as good as it does. This is Richard Jones. He's our production editor. He reads everything we write, takes out all the spelling mistakes, and makes sure it's fit to print. And this is Nick Veach, consultant editor and Amiga Format's resident technical expert. Anyway, let's leave them to get on with their work. Let's go to my desk. A hard drive is a very useful thing to have attached to your computer, but not if you don't understand how to use it properly. This video will explain how to install, set up, and use a hard drive with your A1200. Now, over to our expert. I'm sure you'll find this tutorial very useful and informative.
As a regular reader of Amiga Format, you'll already know what a huge difference a hard drive can make to the Amiga 1200 computer. During the course of this video, you'll learn everything you need in order to master the mysteries of these wondrous devices for yourself. You'll be able to find out what makes hard drives so special, you'll find out how they work, and you'll also discover what a hard drive can do for you. We'll even take you step by step through the process of actually installing a hard drive for yourself. All you'll need is a screwdriver, a little bit of patience and care, and before long you'll be able to experience the wonders of hard drives for yourself. Before we go any further, however, now's probably a good time to answer a few commonly asked questions. First of all, what exactly is a hard drive? This may seem rather obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people have difficulties in pinning down an exact definition. Well, put simply, a hard drive is a device that stores computer data and computer programs for quick and easy access. Although they're a lot more expensive than your average floppy disk drive, hard drives offer a number of distinct advantages. First of all, even a fairly small capacity hard drive can hold considerably more data than a floppy disk can. A 20 megabyte hard disk, for example, can hold the equivalent of about 20 disks worth of information. And believe me, a 20 megabyte hard drive is very, very small nowadays. Most people opt for at least an 80 megabyte drive, and very often 120 or 160 megabytes. And because hard drives can store so much information in one place, the great thing about a hard drive is that you can group together all your favourite programs and gain instant access to them without having to hunt around for the appropriate floppy disks. This goes for your workbench disks too, because you can boot your A1200 directly from your hard disk drive. You no longer need to hunt for your workbench disk each time you wish to access the workbench. All you have to do is install the entire contents of the workbench disk onto your hard drive, and you can put those disks away for good. Once Workbench has been installed onto your hard drive, you'll never need those floppies again, provided, of course, nothing goes wrong. Now that we've established just how useful a hard drive can be, the next question you should ask yourself is what type of hard drive you need. Don't make the mistake of assuming that all hard drives are the same. Just because a hard drive appeared to work inside your friend's PC compatible, or indeed inside another model of Amiga, that doesn't necessarily mean that the drive will be suitable for use within your A1200. Just like the A600, the A1200 features what is known as an IDE hard drive controller, which is built into the machine's complex electronics. This little silicon wonder enables you to internally fit a hard drive to your A1200 without having to fork out for an expensive hard drive controller. All you need to do is ensure that the drive you purchase is of the correct type, and it should work without problems with your A1200. The A1200 needs what is known as a 2.5-inch AT IDE hard drive. Be warned, there are other types of IDE drive available which will not work with your A1200. Some of these are too big physically to fit in the space in the 1200, while others use a different version of the IDE control electronics. If you're buying your hard drive through an advertisement in Amiga Format, however, all you need to do is to tell the salesperson that you own an A1200, and they should be able to supply you with a suitable drive without you having to worry. Make sure too that the company that you purchase your drive from supplies you with everything you need to get the drive up and running. At the very least, you're going to need a suitable IDE cable and a copy of Commodore's HD install diskette. Both of these items are very important, so don't accept anything less. It's important to make sure that you get a drive that is big enough too. We're not talking about physical size here. As we've said before, the A1200 will only accept a 2.5-inch drive. What we're talking about is the capacity of the drive. The capacity of the disk directly relates to how much information your hard drive will be able to hold. Although a 20 megabyte hard drive may sound more than enough for your particular needs, you'll be surprised just how quickly it will fill up. If you can stretch your budget a little further, go for a drive that is at least 80 megabytes in size. Anyway, that's enough of the theory. Now you've bought your hard drive, we can move on to the task of actually installing it inside your A1200. Before we go any further, however, a word of warning. Fitting a hard drive isn't the sort of task that should be undertaken lightly. If you have no experience of working with delicate electronic equipment, you may be better off taking your Amiga A1200 to an experienced engineer. Although Amigas are fairly robust, they are very susceptible to static electricity. So one false move and you could cause some very expensive damage. If in doubt, get an engineer to do the work for you. It's also important to point out that fitting a hard drive yourself will invalidate your A1200's warranty. What this means is that if something does go wrong with your A1200 during the remaining warranty period, Commodore will not honour your warranty and you'll be forced to pay for the repairs yourself. If this does worry you, take your machine to a Commodore-approved engineer who can fit the drive for you without affecting your warranty. Obviously, Amiga format and indeed future publishing can be held responsible for any damage you may cause should you undertake the upgrade yourself. In order to fit a hard drive for yourself, the first thing you'll need is a couple of screwdrivers. You'll need one of the Phillips type, the crosshead sort, and you need one of the flat-headed type. This is a set we've got of jeweler's screwdrivers and they're quite cheap. The other thing you'll need to do is clear yourself a good workspace. We've got a very uncluttered area here with no papers and no junk lying around, and that's exactly what you need. The very first thing you must do is switch off your Amiga and unplug it from the mains. Never, and I repeat never, do any work on your Amiga with it plugged in. You could end up frying the Amiga and also frying yourself. The next step is to actually take all the cables out from the back of your Amiga, disconnect the mouse, the video, anything else connected to it, and then turn it upside down and locate the 5 fixing screws on the bottom that hold the top of the case on. They're actually, we've taken a couple of these out already because we do tend to do that, but you'll actually find there are extra screws at the back here which you do not need to remove. The only ones you're worried about are 3 along the front and 2 at the sides. Okay, so I'm going to take out the remaining screws. You may also notice that these are what's called self-tapping screws, so they can become a little bit tight. They actually find their own way through the plastic when they're put in, and they can become a little bit tight, so be careful with them. You'll also notice that there's a warranty seal in the middle of the machine. This is a silver seal that tells Commodore if you've been inside the machine because it protects the top of one of the screws you need to remove. So you'll have to take that seal off to take the screw out from underneath, and obviously then everybody will know you've invalidated the warranty. The other thing that's worth bearing in mind is the fact that, apart from some of the screws are very tight, is the fact that the screws at the front are slightly smaller than the ones at the side. So do be very careful when you put them aside to make sure you keep them separate. Keep the longer ones separate from the shorter ones. So take that last screw out and put it aside. You just simply turn the machine over, put it on its front, and then you peel it up from the front. This one's a little bit suspect, and it should just hinge up like that. You might find it's a little bit tricky because it's got clips all down the sides and particularly at the back to hold it, but basically it just lifts up as if it were hinged along the back end. What you then have to do is simply take the keyboard as well as the back case and just rest them back there. You might find you need something to lean them against, so I'm just going to slide it around and rest it against the monitor there. Okay, like that. At the back here you've got the green ribbon cable that holds the keyboard onto the circuit board, and over to the side here, that big silver thing there is the floppy disk drive, and then covering all the rest of the area where under the circuit board is, we have metal shielding just to cover everything up. The cradle is actually a mounting plate that's specifically designed to hold IDE hard drives. So your next thing is just to slip it out. It's not attached. All you have to do is just pull it out gently. And now we're going to attach the IDE hard drive to the cradle. So I'll just move that over there out of the way. Before we actually attach the hard drive to the cradle, however, the first thing we want to do is fit the IDE cable. Now this has a plug at the end which simply plugs onto the end of the hard drive. It's fairly straightforward. If you've got a problem, there is a notch which shows you which way around it's supposed to go. But that simply slips onto here on the end of the ID drive. Just be reasonably careful putting the cable into place. The pins are quite thin and do bend easily, so just be a bit careful. Right, the next thing we're going to do is actually screw it down to the base plate. The one thing you want to make sure is that you've got the ID hard drive the right way round. The cable actually needs to be at this end, so I've got it the wrong way around, so I need to turn it round first before we do anything else. And as well as being the wrong way around, this is actually the wrong way up. You want the printed circuits on the bottom. So we're just going to turn this over. So we now have the cable on the right hand side and the top of the hard drive is just on the top. So we're now simply going to take the hard drive and screw it to the mounting cradle so it's securely attached when we put it back in. You can first check where the screw holes are. The ones you need to use are right on the outside edge, and so there should also be holes in the base plate, the cradle, on the outside edges too. These are the ones you need to put your screws in. Make sure you've got your hole lined up with where the screw thread needs to go through. Slip your screw in and screw it in with a small Phillips screwdriver. And simply do the same at the other end. Right, now the drive is attached to the cradle and the cable's attached to the drive, our next step is to actually fit the other end of the cable onto the Amiga. To do this, the best bet is to just hold it with your left hand above where it's going to go and gently slot the cable onto the connector. Things to look out for to make sure the cable is straight, not twisted, and not to force the plug down on the pins in here too hard, because you may bend a pin. If you do bend a pin, don't just try and bend it back, because that could lead to problems later. You would be better to consult an experienced electronic engineer. So now we just fit that plug carefully down into there, and we're ready. All you have to do now is just sit the cradle back into the slots that it came out of in the first place. Shouldn't have any problems doing that. And there, essentially, your hard drive is installed. All we have to do now is replace the keyboard and reassemble the Amiga's casing. One thing to watch out for, however, is that you do align the keyboard correctly. There are 4 notches along the front of the Amiga. You just make sure the keyboard slots in under those down here. So I'll just bring it over here a shade. Just make sure that the keyboard at the front slots in under those notches and then it sits in place properly. Then all you have to do is drop the casing down on top of it, turn it back over and put the screws back in. Don't forget that you have to put the longer screws in the sides and the slightly shorter ones along the front, 2 there and 3 along here. Well, of course, in actual fact, I've only got 3 screws in this Amiga because it belongs to Amiga format. It's been taken apart many times. And here it is, all finished, and hopefully ready to go. Well, congratulations, you now managed to fit a hard drive inside your Amiga 1200. All you have to do now is connect back up all the various cables and bits and pieces and make sure it's all working. We'll just put back the monitor cable and then we can plug in a mouse again and obviously get the power back on. Now hopefully when we start it up it should make a noise like a small fan running, and that's the sound of the hard drive itself. If it doesn't make that noise, or if you don't get the purple screen that shows you the workbench has loaded okay, then don't worry, all you need to do is go back to the first step and do it over again, just to make sure you've done everything properly. But let's try and see what happens. Seems to be okay. And there we go. In actual fact, we've got the drive light showing us the hard disk drive is now running. So everything working fine. And because this hard drive is already installed with the workbench and software, we've now got the Amiga completely booted up with workbench all ready to go. Everything's working fine here, but if you do have any problems, and you've been back over the procedure and tried it again, and you're still not getting the machine working properly, then now would be a good time to consult an experienced electronic engineer. Right, now that we know our Amiga 1200 and hard drive are both working properly, we brought them out of the workshop and back here into the office so that we can set up the hard disk drive using the HD install software. We'll also install the workbench software and all the programs that we want to store on our new hard drive. You'll now need your workbench floppy disk, so get that out from wherever you keep it and boot up your Amiga from it. If you've got the other 4 Amiga system disks handy, that would be useful too, because shortly we'll want to install the whole set onto the hard drive. With any luck at all, this should be the last time you'll need your workbench disk. Once the workbench screen has appeared, you're ready to load up the hard disk install software. Find the install disk, which, as we've said, should have been supplied with your hard drive. Then flip out the workbench disk and put in the install disk instead. Open up the install disk window and find the HD tools drawer. Then open that too. Inside that window, you should find the HD Toolbox program, so load it by double-clicking on its icon. After a few short seconds, you should see a window appear that almost fills the screen, like this one. If everything is working okay, you should also see some information about your hard disk drive in this box at the top of the window. Although your Amiga is currently claiming that the drive interface is SCSI, which is a completely different thing from an IDE drive, don't be fooled by it. This is simply a little software trick that was employed by Commodore to ensure that IDE drives work with all Amiga software. Before we can go any further, we need to let the program know what type of drive is inside your A1200. To do this, just click on the entry for the drive in the box at the top of the window, just to make quite sure it's highlighted, and then click on the Change Drive Type gadget. The contents of the window should then change so that you're presented with a smaller box and 3 gadgets underneath it. Next, we're going to make quite sure that the Amiga knows exactly what kind of hard drive you put in. So to do that, we'll click on the Define New gadget here. The window contents should now change again to look like this. Next, we'll click on the Read Configuration gadget. This will make your Amiga check to see what type of hard drive you have installed, and all the little boxes on the screen should change to fill up with information about your hard drive. When it's done that, click on the OK gadget, and the Amiga will try and store the data on the install disk, so you'll have to flip it out and take off the write protection. Click on the OK gadget in this screen as well, and after you've told it you do want to save these changes, will be returned to the main screen. You will, however, have to put your workbench disk back in the drive once more. Basically, your Amiga hard drive is now all set up to work properly, and you could start storing data on it straight away. However, we're going to do something a little bit more clever. We're going to partition the hard drive. Partitioning a hard drive is a little trick that fools your Amiga into thinking that your one big hard drive is actually 2 or more smaller hard drives. This may sound a little pointless, but partitioning a hard drive actually makes a lot of sense. For starters, Several partitions work faster than one big partition, and because each partition is treated completely separately, you won't lose all your data if one of the partitions happens to develop read-write errors. How many partitions you set up on your hard drive is entirely up to you. Most people, however, tend to create at least 3. One partition can be used to hold all your workbench system software. A second partition can be used for all favourite programs. And finally, the third can be used to store all the data from these programs. The size of each partition is important too, especially when you're deciding how big to make the partition that holds your workbench software. When you consider that Workbench comes on 5 disks, you're going to need at least 5 megabytes to store it all. More is definitely recommended, and in fact we'd strongly recommend you use at least 8 megabytes for your Workbench partition. Partitioning your hard drive is actually very simple indeed. With the HD Toolbox program still loaded, click on the Partition Drive gadget up here. And you should see a display similar to this one. Note the long black bar across the top of the window. This bar represents the total capacity of your hard disk drive. By default, the drive will be in one great big partition, which takes up the entire capacity of the drive. At the far right of the bar, you should see a little blue arrow. Click on it with a mouse pointer and drag it sideways to free up some disk space. When you let go of the mouse pointer, the black bar should have shrunk, and also the size parameter below the arrow here should have changed to reflect the new size of the partition. You should now be left with a blank area to the side of your first partition. This is the area of your hard disk you've now freed up. It's probably easiest to think of the partition on the left as the first partition, and to put the contents of your Workbench disks in this one. Because you want the Amiga to boot up Workbench when you switch the machine on, it's vital to ensure that the little gadget down here, labelled bootable, is activated. If it is, you should see a little tick symbol in the gadget's box. If it's not, then simply click once to activate it. Now let's create a new partition. The first thing you need to do is click on the new partition gadget. You now need to select an empty area for your new partition. Click somewhere inside the empty region of the grey box and it should turn black. You'll also notice that the first partition will now be ghosted. You've now effectively created a second partition. Near the bottom of the window you should see a string gadget containing the text "Change Me." First, click on this area of the screen and then use the backspace key to remove the old text. Then simply type in a name for your new partition. Once you've done this, press the return key and the new name will be entered. Just like the first partition, you can also shrink the size of your new partition to free up further space. That's only if you really want to create any more partitions. Once again, all you have to do is click on the blue arrow and drag it left to shrink partition. When you let go of the mouse pointer, more disk space will be freed up for further partitions. If you're happy with just 2 partitions, however, share the total amount of disk space between them and then click on the OK gadget. You should then be returned to the main HD Toolbox display. In order to fix the changes that we've made, click on the Save Changes to Drive gadget in the bottom right hand corner of the window. You should then be returned to the Workbench. We now need to prepare the hard disk for use by formatting it so that it can store Amiga data. We'll actually have to format each partition as if it were a separate disk. Remove your HD install diskette and reinsert your Workbench disk. And then reset your Amiga by holding down the 2 Amiga keys and the Control key. When the Workbench reloads, you should see some brand new icons appear, one for each partition you created. Select your first partition so that the icon is highlighted, and then format it in just the same way as you would format a floppy disk. Go to the Icons menu and choose the Format Disk option. Then sit back and wait until it is finished. Once the first partition has finished formatting, you just need to repeat the process on your other partitions until all the partitions have been formatted. You'll be pleased to learn that we've almost reached the end of our journey. All that remains is to install the entire contents of all your workbench disks onto your hard drive. Thankfully, this is really very simple because Commodore actually supply an installation program on the HD install disk that does the job automatically. Reinsert the HD install disk and you should find a drawer called Install, inside which you'll find a large group of icons labelled with the names of different languages. Presumably, you want to install an English version of Workbench, so let's double-click on the English icon, and Commodore's install program will now guide you gently through the process of installing Workbench onto your hard drive. All you have to do is swap over the disks when you're told to. Well, congratulations, because you now have an Amiga 1200 complete with a hard drive containing all your Workbench system software. In order to test to make sure everything went okay, remove all disks from your Amiga's disk drives, and then reboot your machine. If all went well, your Amiga should now boot up Workbench from your hard disk drive. Before we finish off, it's only fair to warn you that hard drives are not necessarily 100% reliable. There are really only two things that can go wrong, but one of them is a little bit disastrous. If something really unlucky happens, like your computer crashing when the hard disk drive is accessing, the hard disk could become confused, and if it does, it's likely to lose all your data altogether. To protect yourself against this, you need to buy a hard disk backup utility. A good example is a program called Amiga Pro. Using the backup utility, you can save all the data on your hard drive to a set of floppy disks. The backup utility makes it easier by organising all the data on your hard drive so that all you need to do is sit by the computer and feed it a fresh floppy disk every time it asks for one. When it's saved all the data on your hard drive, you can put the stack of floppy disks aside, and then if the hard disk does crash, you can restore all the data from these backup copies. You should back up your hard drive like this at least once a month. The other thing you'll find useful is a hard disk maintenance program such as Amiga Tools, a version of which was provided on extra cover disk with Amiga format issue 57. You can also get similar PD programs such as Disk Salve for only a couple of pounds. The disk maintenance utility is especially useful for doing something called defragmenting or defragging your hard disk drive. Just to explain that, what happens is that as you store more and more data onto your hard disk, the Amiga starts having trouble finding fresh space to put it in, and so it starts storing files in several small parts, rather than one big part. A defragmentation program will whiz through the contents of your hard disk, sorting all the files out so they're all back in one piece. This will make your hard drive run more quickly again. The one other thing that might happen is that your hard disk drive will begin to develop read-write errors over a period of time. But the best cure for this is simply to back up all the data you want to keep to floppy disks, then reformat your hard drive and install all the software on it again. There's just one last thing we ought to mention. If you're a little bit worried by all this stuff about taking your Amiga apart and be careful about electricity and invalidating your warranty, then you don't actually have to fit a hard drive inside the Amiga. Hard drives like this have just come onto the market, and they're terribly easy to fit because they simply plug in to the PCMCIA slot on the left-hand side of the Amiga. No soldering and no gluing, as they say. The drive's called a Smart Store Plus and is available from mail-order dealer India at a cost of £140 for a 20 megabyte version or £170 for a 30 megabyte version. It's certainly much easier to fit, and Amiga Format's tests seem to show that it's slightly faster than the usual internal IDE drives, so it could be a very good deal. Anyway, you now know everything you need to know about hard drives, so all that remains to be said is the best of luck putting a hard drive in, and happy hard driving.
We've produced a series of videos as part of our commitment to you, our readers. If you have any suggestions on how we should improve the videos or the magazine itself, please write to me, Steve Jarrett, at the address at the end of this video. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you again soon.
Additional videos in the Amiga format range include Personal Paint, an introduction to the A1200, A1200 hard drives, upgrading your machine, Music X, Multimedia, Desktop Video Volume 1, Desktop Video Volume 2, and finally the Amiga Format Guide to Clarissa. Priced at just $14.99 each, or any three for $34.95, they represent excellent value for money. For further details, contact BVG at the address given at the end of this video.